Behind every picture-perfect love story, there is often a hidden truth. For Julia Trapkina and Brandon Gibbs from 90 Day Fiancé, that truth was far darker than anyone expected. What seemed like a happy reality TV romance slowly turned into a heartbreaking collapse that ended in debt, prison, and divorce. Julia Trapkina and Brandon Gibbs appeared to have everything. They were newly married, sharing smiles on social media, and talking about building a future together. Fans believed their love was real, but behind the cameras, their marriage was already cracking. Brandon Gibbs secretly became involved in online gambling. At first, it seemed harmless. One night, while scrolling online, he saw an ad promising easy money from home. He placed a small bet, just $50. When it turned into more than double, he felt a rush he had never felt before. That first win made him believe he had found a way to improve their life. Brandon didn't tell Julia. He knew she hated gambling and wouldn't approve. What he thought was a temporary secret quickly became an addiction. Night after night, after Julia went to sleep, Brandon stayed awake gambling online. Sometimes he won. Many times he lost. Each loss pushed him to gamble more, believing the next bet would fix everything. Soon, Brandon wasn't just using savings. He maxed out credit cards. He took payday loans. Small amounts of debt turned into thousands, then tens of thousands. Before he realized it, Brandon was nearly $200,000 in debt. He lived in constant fear. He hid warning letters, deleted emails from creditors, and lied whenever Julia asked about money. Julia noticed something was wrong. Brandon became distant, moody, and secretive. Strange withdrawals appeared in their accounts. When she questioned him, he blamed farm expenses and bills. Julia wanted to believe him. She had left her country and her family to be with him. The truth finally came out one afternoon when Julia checked the mailbox. Inside was a thick envelope marked as a default notice. The paper showed the full amount of debt, nearly $200,000. That evening, Julia laid the documents across the kitchen table and confronted Brandon. For the first time, Brandon had no excuses. His secret was exposed. Julia was devastated and furious. This wasn't just about money. It was about betrayal. She had trusted him completely, and he had built their marriage on lies. Brandon tried to explain. He said it started small. He said he wanted to give her a better life. But Julia didn't want excuses. She felt trapped in a nightmare she never chose. Their home, once filled with laughter, turned cold and silent. Phone calls from creditors never stopped. Threats of legal action became real. Julia felt ashamed, stressed, and emotionally exhausted. Brandon begged her to stay and help him fix things, but the pressure only pushed her further away. Eventually, one of the online gambling companies filed a lawsuit against Brandon for unpaid debt. The court case moved forward and Brandon was arrested. The verdict was devastating. Brandon Gibbs was sentenced to 1 year in prison. For Julia, this was the final breaking point. The emotional stress, public embarrassment, and financial ruin became too much. She realized she could no longer stay in a marriage built on secrets and fear. With no other choice, Julia Trapkina divorced Brandon Gibbs. After the divorce, Julia focused on rebuilding her life. She chose to move forward, leaving the pain of the past behind. Later, she decided to remarry and start fresh with a man named Zach, hoping for a future built on honesty and trust. What once looked like a perfect love story ended as a powerful reminder that not everything seen on television is real. Behind the smiles and romance, secrets can destroy even the strongest relationships. That night, Julia sat across from Brandon. Her voice was shaking, but firm. "I don't know if I can do this anymore. I can't live like this, Brandon. I didn't come here to watch my life fall apart." Brandon's eyes filled with tears. "Julia, please don't leave me. I need you. I'll fix this. I promise. Just give me a chance." Julia slowly shook her head. "You had your chances. So many of them. And every time you chose to lie. I don't know if I can ever forgive you for this." Brandon's secret was no longer hidden. And with it came a storm Julia Trapkina was not prepared for. The bright, outspoken woman viewers once saw laughing on 90 Day Fiancé was now facing a future filled with shame, betrayal, and financial ruin. Night after night, Julia lay awake in the dark, staring at the ceiling. Her mind refused to rest. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the same number. $200,000. A mountain of debt that felt impossible to escape. She thought about everything she had given up. Leaving her family in Russia, giving up her independence, starting over in a new country. She had taken risks for love, trusting Brandon's promises of a stable and happy life. Now, those promises felt like a cruel joke. Beside her, Brandon tossed and turned, whispering apologies Julia no longer had the strength to answer. The silence between them became heavier than any argument. The phone never stopped ringing. Unknown numbers called day and night. Julia grew anxious every time she heard it. Sometimes she answered and heard harsh voices demanding money. Other times, Brandon rushed to pick up, leaving the room to hide his shame. But there was no hiding anymore. Letters kept arriving. Notices were taped to their door. Each one was a reminder of how far they had fallen. Julia felt trapped, not only by the debt, but by the public shame. They were reality TV stars. People followed their lives. She wondered how long it would take before the truth became public. How long before blogs and headlines exposed everything. Julia had always been strong-willed, but this tested her in ways she had never known. At first, she tried to be supportive. She told herself marriage meant standing together through hard times, but resentment slowly grew inside her. Every time she looked at Brandon, she no longer saw the man she married. She saw the lies. She saw the weakness that brought them there. "You didn't just ruin your life, Brandon," she snapped one evening. "You ruined mine too. Do you even care what this has done to me?" Brandon, pale and exhausted, could only whisper, "I'm sorry, Julia. I never wanted this for us." But the apologies began to feel empty. As the lawsuit moved forward, Julia was pulled deeper into the nightmare. Court dates were scheduled. Lawyers became involved. Every document and meeting reminded her of the chaos Brandon had created. She sat beside him in the lawyer's office, arms crossed, jaw tight, listening to discussions about repayment plans, settlements, and prison time. At one point, the lawyer looked directly at her. "If this debt cannot be repaid, Brandon faces serious legal consequences. Mrs. Gibbs, this will affect you as well. Your joint assets, your accounts, your future." Julia felt her heart sink. "My future?" she thought. What future? The emotional pressure became unbearable. She pushed friends away. She avoided family. She stayed off social media. She couldn't pretend everything was fine while her world was falling apart. Arguments at home became constant. She demanded answers Brandon didn't have, solutions he couldn't give. "Do something," she screamed one night, slamming her hand on the table. "Find a way out. Don't just sit there waiting for everything to collapse." But Brandon had no answers. He barely spoke. He barely ate. His despair was overwhelming. One evening, after another exhausting day, Julia sat alone on the couch. Tears streamed down her face. "This isn't what I wanted," she whispered. "This isn't the life I dreamed of." For the first time, she allowed herself to think the unthinkable. Maybe I can't stay. Maybe this marriage is already over. She looked at Brandon slumped across the room, his eyes empty, his spirit broken. And in that moment, she realized something painful. She no longer saw him as her partner. She saw him as her burden. The day of the court hearing arrived like a storm. Julia had dreaded it for weeks. This was the moment Brandon's secret life would be exposed in front of strangers. The courthouse felt cold and intimidating. Julia walked beside Brandon, her steps heavy, her face drained from exhaustion. She wore a simple black dress, not for style, but to blend in. Brandon looked worse. His suit hung loosely on his thin frame. His shoulders were slumped. His eyes were dark from sleepless nights. As they entered, Julia felt eyes on them. Some people recognized them from 90 Day Fiancé. Others just saw another troubled couple. Either way, Julia wanted to disappear. Inside, the process was cold and formal. Lawyers spoke clearly and without emotion. Debts were listed. Documents were shown. Every number felt like another stab to Julia's heart. The prosecutor described Brandon as reckless and dishonest. Records of gambling activity were presented. Screenshots showed thousands of dollars lost in minutes. This is not just financial mismanagement, the prosecutor said. This is a pattern of addiction, dishonesty, and disregard for responsibility. Julia lowered her head, humiliated. Brandon's lawyer tried to defend him. He spoke of stress, addiction, and regret. He mentioned Brandon's hard work on the family farm and his clean past. Brandon then addressed the court. His voice shook. I made mistakes. I thought I could fix them, but I only made things worse. I never meant to hurt Julia. I take full responsibility. Julia watched him without emotion. She had heard these words too many times. After hours, the judge spoke. Mr. Gibbs, you have failed to meet your financial obligations. Your gambling, dishonesty, and inability to resolve this situation leave no alternative. You are sentenced to 1 year in prison. The words echoed through the room. Brandon went pale. Julia's hands shook, but she did not reach for him. The gavel struck. Brandon was led away in handcuffs. Julia stood frozen as the man she once loved was taken from her sight. His eyes searched for hers, desperate. She didn't look back. The days after were dark. News spread quickly. Fans talked. Blogs posted. Social media reacted. Some felt sorry for her. Others mocked her. She left the prison that day feeling strangely calm. The tears she expected never came. Instead, there was a heavy numbness in her chest. Julia sat in her car for a long time before starting the engine. She knew the truth now, even if she didn't want to say it out loud. Waiting for Brandon would mean putting her life on hold for someone who had already destroyed it once. The weeks after that visit were quiet but painful. Julia returned to an empty home. Brandon's absence was everywhere. His clothes were still in the closet. His shoes still sat by the door. But the silence felt different now. It wasn't tense or angry. It was final. Julia began handling everything on her own. Bills, paperwork, legal documents. She met with lawyers again, this time without Brandon beside her. They explained her options clearly. Staying married would keep her tied to his debt and legal problems. Divorce would allow her to protect what little future she still had. That night, Julia sat alone at the kitchen table, the same place where Brandon's secret had first come out. She looked around and realized how much of herself she had lost trying to save a marriage that was already broken. I can't keep paying for his mistakes, she whispered to herself. I deserve better than this. The decision didn't come with relief. It came with sadness, guilt, and fear. Julia worried about how people would judge her. She worried about starting over again. She worried about being alone in a country that still didn't feel like home. But deeper than all of that was one clear feeling. Staying would destroy her. Julia filed for divorce soon after. The process was cold and businesslike. Papers were signed. Dates were set. Brandon was notified in prison. When she received his response, filled with apologies and promises, Julia cried for the first time in weeks. Not because she wanted him back, but because she finally accepted that the man she loved no longer existed. The divorce was finalized quietly. No cameras, no celebration, just an ending. Public reaction came quickly. Fans speculated online. Some accused Julia of abandoning Brandon when he needed her most. Others praised her for choosing herself. Julia stopped reading comments altogether. She knew no one truly understood what she had lived through. With the marriage over, Julia focused on survival. She found work, kept busy, and slowly rebuilt her confidence. Some days were harder than others. There were moments when she blamed herself for not seeing the signs sooner. But over time, she learned to let go of that guilt. Brandon's choices were not her responsibility. She reconnected with friends she had pushed away. She called her family more often. Their voices reminded her who she was before the stress, before the cameras, before the lies. Months passed. Brandon remained in prison, and Julia moved forward. She no longer felt tied to the past. The pain didn't disappear, but it softened. One evening, while out with friends, Julia met someone new. His name was Zach. He wasn't loud or flashy. He listened more than he talked. He didn't know much about reality TV. And when he did recognize her, he didn't treat her like a headline or a story. At first, Julia kept her distance. She wasn't ready. Trust didn't come easily anymore. But Zach was patient. He didn't push. He didn't promise grand futures. He simply showed up, consistently and honestly. They talked about life, about mistakes, about starting over. Julia slowly opened up about her past, about the debt, the gambling, the prison sentence. Zach didn't judge her. He didn't try to fix her. He just listened. For the first time in a long while, Julia felt safe. Their relationship grew slowly. No rush, no pressure. Julia learned what it felt like to be in a partnership without fear. There were no secret phone calls, no hidden bills, no constant anxiety, just calm. Eventually, Julia realized something important. Love didn't have to be loud or dramatic. It didn't have to hurt. When Brandon was released from prison months later, Julia had already moved on emotionally. They exchanged a few final messages to close that chapter. There was no anger left, only distance. They were no longer part of each other's lives. Julia later married Zach in a small, private ceremony. No cameras, no audience, just a quiet promise to move forward together. It wasn't about proving anything to anyone. It was about choosing peace. Looking back, Julia understood how easily love could turn into a trap when trust was broken. Her story became a reminder that behind reality TV romance, real people live with real consequences. She had lost a marriage, but she hadn't lost herself. And in the end, that made all the difference. Time moved forward even when Julia felt stuck. Each morning she woke up with a mix of fear and determination. Some days she felt strong, convinced she had made the right choice. Other days, the weight of everything she had been through pressed down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. Healing was not a straight path. It came in waves. Julia tried to rebuild routines. She went to the gym again, something she had once loved, but stopped during the chaos. She cooked meals just for herself, learning to enjoy quiet moments without guilt. At night, she wrote in a notebook, pouring out thoughts she never said out loud. Writing became her escape, a place where she could be honest without being judged. There were moments when memories returned without warning. A song they once danced to, a place they had visited together. Even small things like passing a farm on the highway reminded her of Brandon and the life she thought she would have. When that happened, Julia let herself feel the sadness instead of fighting it. She was done pretending she was fine when she wasn't. Friends noticed the change in her. She was calmer, but also more guarded. The fire that once defined her was still there, but it burned differently now. It wasn't fueled by anger anymore. It was fueled by self-respect. As time passed, Julia began to understand something important. Loving someone does not mean sacrificing your dignity. She had confused loyalty with endurance, believing that staying no matter what made her strong. Now she realized that walking away took far more courage. Zach continued to be part of her life, slowly and naturally. They didn't rush into labels or promises. He respected her boundaries and never pushed her to move faster than she was ready for. When Julia pulled back emotionally, Zach didn't disappear. He stayed steady. One evening, they sat together on a balcony, watching the city lights below. Julia spoke quietly, almost to herself. "I used to think love was supposed to be hard," she said. Zach looked at her and replied gently, "Love can be serious, but it shouldn't hurt all the time." That sentence stayed with her. Over time, Julia started to believe she deserved peace. Not perfection, not fantasy, just peace. With that belief came confidence. She stood taller. She laughed more easily. She stopped apologizing for choices that saved her life. People still recognized her from time to time. Some asked about Brandon. Some asked about the rumors. Julia learned how to answer without reopening old wounds. "That chapter is closed," she would say calmly. And it was true. When Brandon reached out again after his release, Julia felt a brief tightening in her chest, but no fear. They exchanged a few short messages. He apologized again. He said prison had changed him. Julia listened, but she didn't reopen the door. "I hope you find peace," she wrote. And with that, she let go completely. There was no dramatic goodbye. No final argument. Just acceptance. Julia's relationship with Zach deepened naturally after that. Trust was built in small ways. Honest conversations. Shared plans. Quiet evenings that didn't feel heavy. For the first time in years, Julia wasn't waiting for something to go wrong. Eventually, Zach proposed. There was no big crowd, no announcement. Just a simple question, asked with sincerity and patience. Julia didn't answer right away. She needed time to feel certain, not pressured. When she finally said yes, it wasn't because she was afraid of being alone. It was because she felt safe. Their wedding was small and private. No reality TV cameras. No public drama. Julia wore a simple dress. She smiled, not for an audience, but because she felt free. As she stood beside Zach, she wasn't thinking about the past. She was focused on the present. Marriage felt different this time. There were no secrets, no fear of hidden bills or late-night lies. Problems were talked through, not buried.